Welcome to Off the Page. Will you start by telling us about your book?
Welcome to Off the Page, the show where we talk with Colorado authors to get the story behind the story. My name is Stacy McKenzie, a librarian here at Mamie Doud Eisenhower Public Library in Broomfield, and I've got two really fabulous authors on the show. Later on, we're going to talk with Stephanie Blake, the author of The Marble Queen, but first, I'm so pleased to have Frances Jenner with us. Hi, Fran. How are you doing?
Hi. Nice to be here.
Now, Fran, I know a lot about you because we actually work together. So tell us what you do when you're not writing and being an author.
Okay. My book just came out in September, so one of the things I've been doing is promotional work for my book, too. So I've had book launch parties and signings at bookstores, and I've been going to schools, too. And as well, I'm in a couple of writing groups, too. I'm in a writing critique group and a writing support group. And then I spend time with my family, have a lovely husband, and Doug, and we have, between the two of us, we have 4 children, so I spend time with them. And then my favorite thing to do, if I have time, is to cross-country ski and hiking as well, too.
That's quite ambitious.
So.
And are you an author 24/7? Are you always an author? Or do you have another profession?
I also work as a teen librarian here at Mamie Doud Eisenhower Library.
Give me an overview about what Prairie Journey is about.
Well, it's a story of a girl named Savannah, and the setting, it's in 1850 in Missouri. And so it's a historical fiction novel. And Savannah is, her family, their farmland is worn out, so they have to move to California. And Savannah does not want to move. She loves the land they have. She loves their farm. They have pigs, and she has a great dog, and she has her best friend. So she's very resistant to leaving, but they have to go anyway. So it's a story about how this young girl, who's 12, has to actually leave everything she has behind her and go off into an adventure, and it's a very dangerous adventure. And she has this feeling that something is going to happen that's very scary and horrible to the family. And so, but she doesn't know if it's true or not, but she just has this feeling. So it's a story of how she goes off and she has to recreate her whole life and her whole world, too. And it's a universal theme. I mean, it's a theme where almost everybody has to, at one point or time, give up everything they've known and start over again. So it's a story of how she manages that.
Fran, your main character, Savannah, is so wonderful. What did you draw from to form that character?
When I started the book, I felt like, I feel like every one of my characters is actually a part of me. So I had to, it's kind of like an archaeology dig. I had to dig down deep inside to find out who was the Savannah part of me. And also not only find that, but then try to separate that out. So when I started digging down, part of me that I discovered was the part of me that wants to be like really cool, like a hero, really brave, but that part is not that at all. So it's a part that's constantly trying to be better than I am. So I started with that with Savannah, that's what she wanted. She wanted to be brave, but she wasn't brave. She was actually quite afraid. And it's what happened is I created the character. She started to separate away from me, which was cool, so I had to let her go. And then she started doing things that would surprise me, like, really, Savannah? Are you going to really do that? Wow. Too, which was very cool. So, and as she started down in the journey, she was very terrified at first, and she had some terrifying experiences. But what started happening was that as she started living on the trail, a part of her started to change and started to become more brave, so that part started to evolve. And then another thing that happened too was in terms of poetry. I write a lot of poetry, and I didn't know that Savannah was a poet. So I was traveling the trail. My husband and I traveled the whole trail, and we were at Chimney Rock. And we spent the night there, and I woke up the next morning and started writing a poem, and it was my poem. But later on in the story, as I developed her character, she started writing that same poem, and it changed dramatically. It became Savannah's poem, and it became much more about who she was and how she was seeing herself. And it was a much better poem than what I had written because it was so integrated into her character. So those are some ways that I drew on to get her.
The time period, you said it was 1850s. What about this time period is so exciting that made you want to write about it?
Oh, okay. Well, when I started researching the time period, I started reading journals of pioneers, and there's a lot of journals from that age, from that date of pioneers, and it was fascinating, like what they had to go through. I mean, it was so dangerous, that trail. First of all, there was bad water, so they got cholera a lot, and so when they got cholera, they would die like in 3 or 4 hours often. There were like buffalo stampedes. There were wagon accidents. there were just so many hard things on the trail. And I found that to be amazing, you know, too, because I didn't really know how difficult it really was. There was a lot of death on the trail. So when I saw that, I started really just coming to be amazed at the strength of the pioneers, too. And I thought it's such a great story, too. And then the other thing that happened to me is I realized is that a lot of Americans are very connected to the pioneers. Actually, through great-grandmothers or great-great-grandmothers or fathers. I mean, a lot of us have someone who traveled that trail. So it's really in our DNA. And it's a part of us, and it's that strength, and it's that American spirit. And I wanted kids to really know about that, you know, too, that we still have that spirit in us. And I think that's what makes us truly uniquely American.
You've been talking to some school groups.
Right.
Have they given you any interesting questions or any interesting insights or compliments about what you're writing?
They have really liked the book, you know, too. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback about it. And it's been funny because I was in a school about a month ago, and so I was telling about my trip to Chimney Rock. And so this boy raises his hand and he says, "Are you telling me that you took a trip in order to write this book?" I said, "Yeah." He said, like, "I've never heard of anybody doing that." You know, too. So he thought that was very cool. Then I said to him, I said, have you ever taken a trip to write about something? He said, "No." I said, "Well, maybe it's in your future." Then.
Now, Fran, this is not what you normally wear. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's actually what the pioneers would have worn, too. And they actually walked 2,000 miles in these kinds of dresses, too. And they were actually pantaloons, too. I don't know if you can see those right here.
Whoa, wow.
And it was called gingham, and they only had about, each pioneer only had about 2 dresses, so they had the same dress for 6 or 8 months. By the time they got to the end of the trail, they would just be in tatters.
Oh,
especially the
goodness.
bottom part would be in tatters.
Oh my.
Too.
And we've got the bonnet here, sun protection
that goes with it.
before
Yeah,
SPF?
this is for the sun. Yeah, so they just put it on, and put it on their heads too.
And you know, where do you get an outfit like that?
Yeah, actually, one of my good friends, actually Gigi, who works at the library here, she actually made this for me.
Oh, how wonderful!
Too. She's really good with fashion and design. So
librarians are multifaceted, aren't
she
they?
is.
About the book, as far as who it's written for, what age or type of reader were you looking at when you wrote this book?
Well, I wrote it originally for 3rd grade through 7th grade, so 8 to 12. But what's been happening is that after I wrote it and had it published, my editor said, you know, I think this book is for ages 8 to 80. And I've noticed that I had an 18-year-old come and talk to me about how much she liked it. I've had people in their 60s read it. And so the way I look at it, it's for kids from that age and their parents and their grandparents and everybody. And it's also for teachers, too, to read in the classrooms, too. So it's I kind of started out for that younger age. But it's been, I think it's because it's such a family story, too, that, I mean, I see really families reading it together, you know, and it would be that kind. And as far as the kind of reader that would like it, it's a reader that likes adventure and historical fiction, survival kinds of stories, so all those.
I agree. All the information is appealing to anyone, I think.
Yeah, and it also has, I wrote it in a kind of a lyrical fashion, so someone who likes that kind of a lyrical style would also like it.
What's a message that you would like readers to take away from reading your book?
I wrote it because I wanted to say that I think the book is saying that relationships are the most important thing in life, too. And that, so the book is about Savannah and her relationships, too, with her parents and with her sister and with her friends. And it's a book about also, in order to sustain and maintain relationships, there has to be forgiveness involved, because almost every relationship starts to break down and then has to be rebuilt again. So in the book there's a lot about Savannah's dealing with the issue of forgiveness. Can she forgive herself for something, and can she and her sister forgive each other? Can she and her best friend, Catherine, forgive each other? And then another issue I was dealing with was gratitude, like the idea of being actually grateful for everything that we do have. And I think when you read this book, especially anyone in our culture, when you read how difficult it was to be a pioneer, you will come away thinking, oh my gosh, we have such a great life here, and hopefully it'll sort of create gratitude. I also wanted to have readers understand what it was like to be a pioneer, and then respect and honor pioneers. And then the other thing that I wanted was for readers to, so many of our readers don't go out into the world, into nature. They're behind computers, they're reading, they're at home. But I wanted to connect Savannah to nature itself and show kids how beautiful it is to have relationships with nature too. And she, in the book, she grows more and more into that relationship with nature as the book evolves.
In reading your book and in reading The Marble Queen, which we're going to talk about in a minute, I noticed there were some interesting similarities as far as these little girls struggling with some of gender issues.
I think Savannah's a great model for just not worrying about whether she's a girl or boy. She's just herself, and she just does what she needs to do. And a lot of times she does things that are, even though she thinks she's not a brave kid, she's actually extremely brave. She does some things in the book where she actually helps other people, that she goes out of her way and she actually risks her life, you know, in a couple of times. So I would say that she's just a very strongly herself as a girl, too. So I feel like, and there's a really strong, couple of really strong male characters in the book, too, who I think are very strongly themselves as males. So I think the book is very representative of like what it's like to be a strong girl, and what it's like to be a strong boy.
I think so. And in those times you had to be strong no matter what you were.
Right, right.
Now, let's talk about writing of this book. I happen to know it took you a little while to write the book. How long was it?
Yeah, it took me 6 years to write the book.
And what were some of your struggles, maybe related to why it took 6 years?
Yeah, well, what happened is I've always wanted to be a writer ever since I was 8 years old. And I, you know how sometimes children know what they want to do? I knew that. I've always known that. But I never could figure out how to give myself time and the money to write. But so finally one day I just said, okay, I'm going to start. You know, I'm just going to start doing this. But I still didn't have any confidence. I really didn't believe in myself as a writer. So I had a lot of starts and stops. So I joined a writing group, actually. It was a writing support group. It wasn't a critique group. It was a support group. And so we met together once a month. And each month we would set a goal, and then we would go back and try to meet the goal. And then we'd come back the next month, talk about our process and our writing, and then share. And after about a year, I went into that group thinking, oh, I'm not a writer, I'll never be a writer, I'm never going to finish this. But I just kept doing it. And then all of a sudden what started happening is that one day I realized, you know, I think I'm like a writer. And I started really believing in myself as a writer. So it was a dramatic change. It took about maybe a year, maybe 2 years. And ever since that happened, everything's gone smoothly. I wasn't finished with the book then, but I had a different feeling about it, a different belief about myself and about the book. And so then I actually was able to hire an editor, do a lot of revisions and drafts, and actually come up with a finished manuscript. And then the other struggle I had was actually the trail itself was so overwhelming too. 2,000 miles from Missouri to San Francisco, and I was writing about this trail, but I couldn't get a handle on the trail itself. So when I finally figured out that I needed to actually travel the trail, everything started coming together. My writing was better. I actually felt and understood what the trail was like. I could imagine the characters on the trail, and so that took a lot of time to travel the trail, because my husband and I, Doug, did it for 5 or 6 separate trips too. And so, but every time I would go on one of those trips, I would come back, and the writing of that part of it would start to come alive too. And my blog actually talks a lot about the travels on the trail.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Where can we find your blog?
Yeah, my blog's on my website. It's www.prairiejourney.com.
Wonderful.
Too. So if you want to read a little bit about our travels.
Oh, I think that will give a whole new level to reading the book. Wonderful. Yeah. And now that you're officially an author, published author, I hope that you're going to tell me you're working on another book.
Yeah, actually, I have always wanted to write a book about Billy the Kid.
How wonderful.
My middle name is Bonnie, B-O-N-N-E-Y, and that's Billy the Kid's one of his aliases. So my whole life I've been planning to write this book on Billy the Kid. So I just started. I'm just kind of playing right now with voice and perspective, and I'm interested in him because I'm interested in outlaws. Like, what's it like to be an outlaw? Why does somebody turn to be an outlaw? And also, is it possible to have compassion for an outlaw, or is it not possible to have compassion? And then the other thing I'm interested in is he had a very strong relationship with his mother, and she died when he was 15. So I'm really interested in how that affected him and what happened between that relationship too, and how that affected how he actually became an outlaw that time. So
oh, that's great.
So it's another historical fiction book.
And there's local connection to that.
Right. Yeah.
Also, will be historical fiction.
Yeah, it'll be historical fiction.
Oh,
and,
how
and the
wonderful.
exciting thing is that Pat Garrett, who's the person that killed Billy the Kid, he wrote a book about it, and I'm reading it right now. And a friend who lives in New Mexico just wrote and said she knows his granddaughter, and she's going to hook me up with an interview with his granddaughter.
Things just fall into place sometimes.
I'm excited.
That's marvelous.
And I just started the book about 2 weeks ago, and I just got this letter about how I'm going to be able to interview Pat Garrett's granddaughter. So
wow.
I'm excited.
That's so exciting. Oh, we're all going to be waiting for that one. Fran, thank you so much. It's great to see you. And
thank you, Stacy.
Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your book.
It's great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Congratulations on finally finishing that book.
Thank you.
Join us after the break when we'll be talking with Stephanie Blake.
Stronger, healthier babies. It's what the March of Dimes is all about. Learn more about healthy babies at marchofdimesbaby.org.
Welcome back to Off the Page. I'm so happy to have the author of The Marble Queen here with me. That's Stephanie Blake. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show. Fun book.
Thanks.
And relates to our theme. We've got young girls going through sort of journeys. Yours is a little more symbolic. Before we jump into that, Stephanie, are you a full-time author or do you have another job?
I am a mom of 3 and a full-time writer. If I'm not writing, I'm usually in my backyard with my kids or fishing. I'm just mostly a mom.
Great. And that is a tough job.
With boys.
Even to write, to find that time to write. Give me a little idea what your book is about.
My book is about a girl who, her name is Freedom, Jane McKenzie. She's 10, and she really wants to enter and win a marble shooting competition. But her difficult mother says that marbles are for boys. So it's kind of her journey to do anything that boys can do.
The book takes place in 1959. Why did you choose that specific time?
The 50s were kind of a time where men and women had their own things that they did. And I didn't want to crowd the story with a lot of politics, segregation issues of the time. I just wanted to focus on this little girl and her family and kind of make the story simple.
And so how does that relate to the setting in Idaho Falls, Idaho?
Well, I wanted Freedom to be from a small town because I think small towns are different than big cities because you get to form better relationships with your neighbors. And I really wanted it to be kind of a homegrown story.
Have you ever been from Idaho Falls?
I'm actually, I've been to Boise, and the country is just really beautiful there. And in Idaho Falls, they have these amazing waterfalls. And one of the things that happens in the story is that her brother falls into the waterfalls. So I kind of wanted that to be in the story too.
That fits in perfectly. Well, let's talk about Freedom a little bit more. What a great name. How did you choose that name? I mean, it's obviously symbolic, right? Am I missing something?
Yeah, no, it is. I have 3 boys. And when I was pregnant with my third, we were really hoping for a girl. And I had picked out the name Freedom Jane.
Oh, yeah.
So Freedom is kind of my imaginary daughter.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And she's a little bit of me, really headstrong. I was kind of a tomboy growing up. So.
And you're, like our first author, your character takes a sort of a symbolic journey. Tell me about that for Freedom.
Well, the story of Freedom is a coming-of-age story, coupled with the time of 1959 because the 60s were such a volatile period in our history, and the 50s were that peaceful time. And so the end of the book is at the end of 1959, and it's Freedom's kind of the end of her year of being innocent. And so the journey that she takes is just coming of age, and her eyes are opened to kind of the realities that she didn't really know about before.
Yeah, it's that 59, that little
The
precipice.
little break into the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you say the 60s, it just is a whole different...
It conjures up a lot more than, you know, everyone thinks of the 50s as the poodle skirts and the bobby socks and Elvis, and the 60s are more Woodstock and the peace sign and things like that.
And it's fun to be reading knowing what's coming in,
Right.
in Freedom's next decade.
Right.
And a lot of that deals with gender issues. What are some of those that Freedom has to take?
The mom is very rooted in being a female. She enjoys taking care of her family and knowing that she's the head of the household, really. And she has very strong ideas about what girls can do. And she doesn't want Freedom to have messy hair, and she doesn't want Freedom to be dirty. And one of Freedom's favorite things is fishing, finding worms, just playing with her brother outside. And Mama she really admires Mrs. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the comparisons are, well, you won't see Mrs. Kennedy wearing jeans. And of course Freedom wants to, so.
Yeah. And what are you wanting to convey to your readers about Freedom's wishes versus her mother's? Who's right?
Mostly that girls can do anything that boys can do, and that you shouldn't pigeonhole yourself. You should always, if there's a goal that you want, you should go for it no matter what. And Freedom is very determined to become the Marble Queen at whatever she has to do to get there.
Whatever she has to do.
Whatever she has to do.
Now, I find it interesting that you have 3 boys, and yet you chose to write your book from a girl perspective. Is that just because you're a girl, even though you have a little boy?
Yeah, I think I identify more with girls, of course. You know, my boys are different. They're just very cut and dried. Their emotions are, you know, they're not drama queens. They're just easy. And girls are just so complex. They think about things differently than boys do. But the story actually, I got the idea for it when I read an article about some marble shooters from the 40s and 50s, and they were all men, and they were thinking back on their time as being the marble kings, and I thought, well, weren't there any girls that shot marbles? And that's kind of how it started.
Ah, okay.
So that's why it's a girl character.
So you wondered about that, but what made you jump from, I wonder why there were no marble queens, to writing a book about it? That's a big jump.
It is one of those things that when you're a writer, these characters are alive. They're real to you in your mind. And she would wake me up at night and nag me, you know, and these adventures that she has, they just popped into my brain and had to be written.
I love that you're a member of a group called the Apocalypses. Tell me about that group.
The Apocalypses are a blog group. They're all debut authors from 2012. And of course I was like the last author to have her book finally out. But we all grouped together, and we're all big on Twitter. We have a group blog. We interviewed people, we did giveaways, and mostly we just supported each other, both publicly and privately. We had our own chat group, and whenever you had questions, or maybe you're worried about your release date or your editor or copy edits, you had a group of people to go to and talk with. And also they promoted really heavily for each other on Twitter.
Fabulous.
And
a whole team.
A lot of them have gotten together in real life, where I'm kind of the last one, like I said, so I haven't gotten to get involved as much.
Okay, you were busy getting that book out.
I was. It's a lot of revisions.
And there's another group you belong to called Smack Dab in the Middle. Tell me about that group.
And this is a group blog of middle grade writers, and there's all kinds of us, from debuts to people that have 7, 8, 9 books out.
Oh, wow.
And we pick a theme for the month, and then we each have our assigned day. Mine's the 24th, that we have to write a blog post about whatever the theme is for the month.
Oh, wow.
And we do giveaways and author interviews with other authors. We talk about the struggles of writing, the joys, all of everything.
Well, this is kind of a loaded question, because I think I know the answer, but does this help your writing?
You know, I've strayed away from writing anything new since I've been working on this book for 2 years. It took 6 years to write and 2 years from the sale to revise to get it out. And now promo is like the buzzword, and these activities don't help with your writing, but it's important to be friends with other writers, and it's important to know what other people are writing. So it does help in the end, but it really does cut into your writing time.
But it's something else you need to do, sort of.
It's another thing you need to do.
So Stephanie, your book took 6 years, and Fran that we talked to earlier, her book took 6 years. So that's something to talk to authors about who wonder how long it should take.
It takes as long as it takes. And that is, I guess, when you're a newbie author, that is the hardest thing, is the patience factor. The book, actually writing it, the first few drafts was easy. It took months, but the manuscript sat in a slush pile for a year. I worked with another editor on it for a year, who turned it down at the end, and it takes as long as it takes sometimes.
And you have to deal with that. You have to deal with the rejections and the stopping and the starting.
Yes.
Great. Well, now that we've got this one all done and finished and tucked away, what's your next project? Are you working on another book?
I've actually submitted a proposal for a companion novel to The Marble Queen.
Okay.
It's called The Summer of Impossible Dreams, and it's going to center on it's 10 years in the future of the little girl at the end of the book that's the baby, the Barbara Jean's story, and it's going to be in 1971, and it's going to center around Freedom, who's grown up now, and she's in college, and she quits college to go and be a Vietnam protester.
Oh, wow.
So there's going to be some more themes of alcoholism, the Vietnam War, divorce.
So we do get to see what happens to Freedom.
I hope so.
On the precipice, on the edge there. Wow. Oh, that's great. Stephanie, good luck with that. Do you think it'll take you 6 years to write this one?
It's halfway written.
Okay.
So I hope not. I'm just waiting. When you do your second book, sometimes you get to write a proposal, and which is kind of your idea and some sample chapters. So hopefully it won't take so long.
I think the pattern is usually it doesn't, but if it does, it'll be as excellent as this one. It'll be okay. Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you coming and sharing The Marble Queen with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank the authors on today's show, Fran Jenner with Prairie Journey and Stephanie Blake with The Marble Queen. Check your local libraries for the books that we've talked about on today's show, and join us next time for more on Off the Page.